friends, today we're talking about the Salomon Phantasm 2, and it's a performance trainer. I think that's got to be the most popular segment of running shoes out there. I mean, everybody is trying to make a performance trainer, and Salomon has done pretty well with this one. They've come a long way from the first version of the Phantasm. Let's get into it. Alright my friends, let's get started off with some disclosures. Salomon was good enough to send me the Phantasm 2 for the purpose of review. However, they are not going to get a chance to see this video. They've had no editorial input, and all the thoughts and opinions are my own. So of course, let's get started off with price. The Phantasm 2 will cost you $170. And I want you to remember that this is a performance trainer. This could be a shoe that you grab when you want to do some faster efforts. I suppose you could race in the shoe if you didn't want to buy a race-specific shoe, but it definitely swings more to the training end of the spectrum. The Phantasm 2 has 35mm in the heel, 26 in the forefoot for a 9mm drop. Salomon claims that a US men's size 9 tips the scale at 9 ounces or 255 grams. However, in my size, a US men's size 12.5, it tips the scale at 10.4 ounces or 295 grams. So I'm always happy when a shoe can get below that 300 gram mark for me. It probably doesn't mean anything. If there was another shoe that weighed 301 grams, I probably couldn't tell a difference, but I do like seeing that this shoe is only 295 grams. Now, I want to tell you that this shoe fits true to size. However, in most of Salomon shoes, I do have to go down half a size. So I'm 12.5 in this. For most other shoes, from most other brands, I will tend to go to a US men's size 13. But Salomon and Hoka, for that matter, I usually go down to a 12.5. Okay, let's get started at the top. We're going to work our way down. But before we do, let's talk about aesthetics. I just think this shoe looks fantastic. I love this colorway. I love everything that Salomon has done. Now, if you remember the first version of the Phantasm, you probably wouldn't recognize this from that. Salomon has made a lot of updates, and this is a far superior shoe. So I'll just get this right out of the way now. A lot of people sometimes ask me, well, Matt, can I buy last year's version and save a bit of money? Normally, I'd say yes. With the Phantasm 2, I wouldn't recommend it. I think that this has just come such a long way from the first version that this is the only one to get now. By the way, I was a fan of the first version of the Phantasm, but just looking back, there were a lot of areas that it just didn't meet the mark, and the Phantasm 2, it's at another level. So back to the shoe itself. Look at this heel collar. This is almost like daily trainer amount of padding. Now we have padding, and then just on the inside we have a expanded amount of padding with like bolsters that come around the top of the heel collar. And me just telling you that that's not really enough. This is serious bolster action right here. There is a lot of padding in this heel collar, and that just contributes to a lot of support when your heel gets seated in the shoe. The heel counter is pretty rigid, which is not surprising because I didn't have any heel slip. The shoe was just, when it was on my foot, I was just locked into it. Lovely. Speaking of putting my foot into the shoe, that's another difference between V1 and this. With the first version of the Phantasm, it was sometimes a bit tricky to put your foot into the shoe because the upper just wasn't pliable. The heel collar and tongue were just, they weren't as agreeable. And so you know how sometimes we struggle to put on race shoes just because the upper is a little thinner, yet stiffer, yet not enough room to actually put your foot in because it has to be such a fitted fit. That's more what the original Phantasm was like. This is a lot more of a traditional fit, much more of a daily trainer feel, and of course more comfortable because of that. The Phantasm 2 is using an engineered knit upper, and we do have a lot of overlays, and you can actually see them very well on this colorway because the yellow here with the Salomon logo comes all the way down from the heel all the way around the front to give a little structure to this toe box, and then of course up again the medial side. We have some extended overlays coming around the eyelet chain, and all in all these overlays just help create a nice feel in the midfoot. I did get a good midfoot lockdown. Now the tongue is kind of medium in cushioning. It's certainly not a race day tongue. It's not an overly stuffed daily trainer tongue. It's right in that sweet spot. There's just the right amount of padding. We don't have to overdo it. However, the tongue is not gusseted. Now, it's not gusseted. We do have a lace loop here in the middle, but for me personally, I didn't have any tongue migration, although I do want you to take that with a pinch of salt because I think it's probably because the shape of my foot, I don't often or hardly ever. I can only think of one pair of shoes where I've had tongue migration when the tongue wasn't gusseted. So for the most part, the tongues usually stay put on my foot, and the Phantasm 2 was no exception there. Overall feeling of the shoe, super comfortable. I want to hold this up to you right here to see this. When I put my foot in, I could kind of feel the upper on the top of my foot. It wasn't off-putting. It wasn't anything that I thought about while I was running, but when I put my foot in, it was a little noticeable. Like my toes were right here. You know, it feels like I was touching the upper, even though I wasn't all the time. And I think that's just because the toe box is just a little lower than on some other shoes that I've used. Not sure if that really would make any difference. I can't say it was uncomfortable at all. As I said, the overall feel of the shoe was absolutely beautiful. I had no problems with the comfort, but I did just notice that there. thought I'd mention it. You know, we do have these overlays coming around the outside, and there are clearly some underlays just to give a little support and structure to that toe box. So I think maybe it's just because there isn't the material there to keep off your foot, but it's fine. I don't think it's going to affect anyone negatively. Let's come down to the midsole. Salomon has also made a change from V1 to V2 with the midsole. This is a much softer ride. Now, if you're a fan of Salomon, you know that they tend to run on the firmer side. If we look at all shoes on the spectrum, Salomon's are generally going to be on the firmer end of the spectrum, but the Phantasm 2 is just, it's edging away from that firmer end. And when I put on the shoe, when I went out for a run, I didn't feel like it was a firm shoe that I had to get used to. I've got no problem running in firmer shoes because after like a few minutes of running in them, it's like your body adapts and you don't notice that they're firm. Does that make sense? But I didn't have that feeling in the Phantasm 2. It must just be a softer formulation of their EVA OBC blend. And of course, we are using a dual density setup on the Phantasm 2. On my colorway, it's very easy to see. We've got this yellow top bit, the black foam on the bottom is obviously the other foam, and then in between we've got the energy blade, which is like a composite fiber plate, a nylon plate, something like that. Let's just grab the durometer, and I want to know the difference between these two foams. On the top foam, I've got about 30, and then on this bottom foam right here, I've got about, well, it's kind of tricky. Depending on where I put it, I've got about the same to about 35. So just from my very unscientific reading using my durometer that I got from Amazon, it looks like the top foam is just slightly softer than the bottom foam, which actually makes sense. You know, when you put your foot into a shoe, you're going to want this top part to be a little softer. It's going to contribute to that soft step-in feel. It's going to make that overall feeling of running a lot better if you've got a softer bed for your foot. And then we've got a slightly firmer formulation for the midsole on the bottom, which of course is going to help with picking up the pace, making the shoe feel a little snappier. And then of course contributing to that snappiness and that feeling of structure in the midsole, we do have the energy blade, and I want to bend that up for you. Yeah, it's not the most flexible shoe, but then shoes with a plate are often not that flexible. And this actually makes sense because when we talk about ride, I'll tell you what I thought. And just seeing that flexibility in the forefoot being pretty minimal actually explains why the shoe rides like it does. Now we'll just come down to the outsole. Look, I really like what Salomon does here when they match the outsole rubber to the midsole. I just think that all black looks really good. But we do have Contour Grip outsole rubber. We got a big area covering the entire forefoot, and then we've got like a horseshoe coming around the back. Now, when I look at the forefoot rubber, it looks pretty good. Like, I'm not seeing much wear at all. But when I look at this lateral heel area, now when I run easy, I definitely heel strike, and this lateral heel area is where I touch down. And I am seeing a little bit of wear on this midsole foam right here at the back. So we've got this horseshoe of outsole rubber, but it looks like this outsole rubber could come out just a little further towards the end of the shoe. I think maybe if that happened, I would hit the rubber more and I wouldn't be wearing down the midsole quite so much. Now, I'm always going to be wearing down the midsole just a little bit, but it almost looks like the rubber is untouched and the midsole is getting eaten away slightly. But if we just look at the wear on the outsole rubber, the shoe is going to stand up to a lot. Just I think you have to have pretty good running form to make it actually land on the rubber rather than start eating away at that midsole. Okay, let's talk about ride. I think that is where this shoe is going to shine, but in my opinion at least, it isn't exactly where I think Salomon intended, at least not for me or my style of running. So you know, we've got the S-Lab Phantasm, which is a fast carbon plated shoe. I haven't run in it, but it looks fast. So if that's their race day option, the Phantasm, this is their training option. And I imagine it's made for those faster efforts that you do in training, right? This stiffness of the forefoot makes it extremely uncomfortable when you start picking up the pace. Now, I probably wouldn't go to the track in this shoe, but when I'm going out and let's say I did a lot of my tempo workouts leading up to the Toronto Marathon in the Phantasm 2, and the tempo efforts were just beautiful in this shoe. It just felt comfortable. It felt like it was rolling me through my gait. It just overall felt like a very smooth shoe, nice smooth transitions. And I really felt like when I was going out for those workouts that I had chosen the right shoe. But I also use this shoe a lot for just going out for easy runs. And I was actually surprised how good it feels when I'm just going out for a plod, just logging my daily miles. And that has to be a product of, first of all, we've got this big chunk of softer midsole foam here, and we've definitely got more of a daily trainer kind of upper. This amount of padding on the heel collar is just, it's just too comfortable to not be a daily trainer. So I think Salomon wanted this to be kind of more of their faster day shoe, and it can be. It works extremely well for that. I think it does kind of do double duty. Like if you're looking for a plated daily trainer, I would definitely reach for this. Now again, we've got the whole market with plated daily trainers or performance trainers. It's very saturated at this point. And at $170, I think this is on the higher end of the price range. But if you are a fan of Salomon shoes or you're looking to try Salomon shoes, I think the Phantasm 2 is going to be a brilliant place to start, just because it's very welcoming and it pretty much does everything. Now look, because this plate is just a little rigid. Maybe I'm thinking that I wouldn't go out for an easy long run in this shoe. And that's not because I experienced any issues with it. I certainly didn't. But I'm just wondering about the plate fatigue from such a rigid shoe if you went out for hours and hours. Without a doubt, the amount of cushioning, the protection that you get from the Phantasm 2 is certainly enough that you could go and run for hours and hours. Just if you were sensitive to having a stiff plate, it might be something to think about. But of course, a lot of you aren't going out and running for hours and hours at a time. Most of my runs in this shoe were between an hour and 45 minutes, and during that time I didn't have any issues with it. So take what I'm saying with a grain of salt. Overall, the Phantasm 2 is a very comfortable and very capable daily / up-tempo trainer. And if you were looking for something that feels a little faster that you wanted to use for race day, if you didn't want to buy a specific race day shoe, I think this would probably tick that box too. So overall, very positive result for the Phantasm 2. In fact, I'm looking at some of my other Salomon shoes and I'm trying to think back to how they feel, and I think I can say that the Phantasm 2 has been my favorite Salomon shoe yet. And I think the primary reason for that is that the midsole foam just feels a little softer than some of their other shoes, and that just kind of agrees with me. It's not too soft, and it's still firmer than most other shoes, but it's slightly softer than some of the other Salomon shoes that I've run in, and it just feels really good to me. So now it's your turn. I want to hear from you. Have you ever run in a Salomon shoe? Have you run in the original Phantasm? Are you thinking about getting the Phantasm 2? Let me know in the comments. And with that, it's Matt B. This has been my review of Salomon's Phantasm 2. Be kind, be happy, run well. See you in a couple of days.